Let's see. Is this pretty well a speed round of asking you questions? Yes, sort of. For anybody who has never been to this before, I'll just quick explain. The way these little office hours webinars work is I'm literally just sitting here. I have nothing prepared. This is not a presentation. This is not a sales pitch of any kind. I'm just sitting here. Similar to like in college when your professors had office hours, it just means they're hanging out in their office and they're available for you to come and chat with them if you ever need to. So this is basically just a time I set aside at least once a month where I'm just hanging out here. And if you guys have questions about anything real estate related, can't guarantee I'm always going to have the answer, but you know, this is basically your chance to pick my brain about whatever you're dealing with, any questions you have, any deals you're working on, any specific obstacles or hurdles you're coming across, and I will give my live feedback on what I would do in your situation or just things that you can think about. So yeah, feel free to just ask away, and yeah, I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability. So let's see here. Question here from Chad. I just got through all the modules. Wanted to ask how you set up, structured the buying and selling arms of your land business. Also, did you set up a business credit card to get your business up and running? So when you say, how did you set up the buying and selling arms of your business? Do you mean like the websites or the phone numbers or the business names, or what aspect of that are you referring to, Chad? Business names. Okay. Yeah. The way that I set it up is I would actually sort of do it differently if I started over today, but the way mine works is I've got my, ABC company LLC, like my LLC name. That is what I use as the selling arm of my business. And I created a DBA, or an assumed name, to go along with that same LLC to act as the buying arm of my business. So like my buying website, phone number, voicemail message, business card, letterhead, all that stuff for the buying activities all have that same assumed name to go with it, and its own separate logo and a website and everything. And then when it comes time to sell those properties, I start using the actual LLC name, as well as its own separate website, logo, phone number, all that stuff. So, and really what ultimately matters is when I'm buying properties, like any contracts I fill out, any deeds, any legal documents of any kind, they need to use the actual LLC name, regardless of any DBAs in the process. Those don't matter when it comes to the actual legal documentation side of things. Whenever you're signing any kind of agreement or deed or anything, you need to use your actual LLC name and your title. So whatever your capacity is in that LLC, usually it's member if you use an LLC. You should be signing your name as the member of the LLC. So that's kind of how I separated it out. If I was doing it all over again, I would probably do it the other way, where the LLC name is used for the buying part of it, and then the DBA is used for the selling part. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters, as long as people can understand what the company does, or as long as it doesn't get too confusing, I think is the key. But that's how I do it, and that's how I've done it for years now, and that's worked for me. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's see here. Folks just need to pick the two all panelists. Okay, thanks, Christina. Who was that? Chris. Man, this chat thing is weird. I feel like it's moving all over the place. I'm having a hard time tracking it. Okay. So Jordan says, as expected, I'm finding coming up with comps is one of the biggest challenges of land investing. Yeah, I would sort of agree. I'm able to go to various sites and see similarly sized parcels of land in the same county, but very few in in at all close proximity to the subject property. Wouldn't that make the most comps apples to oranges comparisons? Obviously, this makes it very different from houses where you're looking for comps on the same block or at least neighborhood. Yeah, Jordan, that whole thing coming up with the ideal market value of a lot, it is a very difficult part of the land investing business. It's kind of like one of the biggest obstacles, I think, because like it is very important. Like it has a lot to do with what you end up offering people and all that stuff. But once you get over the fact that like there are no perfect solutions, like it's just impossible to be 100% certain about any property's market value. You can only sort of get a ballpark range. And that's part of why it's so important once you get to that ballpark range to be offering such a low percentage of that. Because if you end up being a little bit off when you came up with that, you're creating for yourself a huge profit margin that's going to protect you in case you were wrong. And what I try to do, I mean, looking at comps, like sold comps, it's worth doing, like trying to find any similar properties that sold recently. A lot of times, though, you're just not going to find adequate comps. Like houses is a very different thing, as you know, because you quantify things based on, you know, a number of bedrooms and bathrooms and neighborhoods, and, you know, appraisers will look at things like the cost to rebuild the house if they ever had to, and like none of that stuff applies to land, or the comps just aren't there. So it's just impossible to do that. So given that it's so hard to do, usually what I ultimately am looking at is not sold comps, but I just find what are similar properties in that near vicinity, like the same zip code. Like say if I'm looking at a 1 acre property, I'm going to find all the properties in that zip code that, or maybe, you know, Zillow even lets you draw a line around the spot, you know, the place that you're trying to target. And you can just find out, okay, what are the similar sized properties with similar uses listed for right now? And, you know, that's obviously not perfect either, because listing prices can be very different from selling prices. However, it's telling you like, okay, what is my competition doing, and what listings do I need to look better than when it comes time for me to list my property? Because I mean, ideally, your listing will be the best property at the lowest price on the market. I mean, that's how you attract buyers and sell it a lot sooner than all those other people will. So it's just about understanding like, what does the landscape look like, and what kinds of other listings am I going to go up against when it comes time to sell this thing? So if you can find similar sales comps, that's a great thing to know. Or, you know, sometimes you'll even get so lucky as to know this property or the one next to it just sold within the past year for a certain price. I mean, that's kind of like the perfect scenario, but usually you're not going to find that. That's why you just sort of by default move to the listing prices of similar properties on the market. So that's kind of how I do it. And yeah, if you're not able to find comps, that's kind of what I would suggest doing as well. Jan is asking, do you ever sell vacant land that has not been cleared of trees? If so, how do you market this type of land? Yeah, all the time, actually. You know, being that a lot of the deals I've done have been in Michigan and other areas of the Midwest where there are lots of trees, that's usually what I'm selling. If there's lots of trees, I'm not going to spend any time clearing those trees out. And I mean, depending on who you ask, that's kind of even a good thing, because, you know, that allows a person to decide if they want a clearing at all, where that clearing is going to be. And granted, it's going to cost them money to do that if they choose to, but, you know, rather than selling somebody land that's completely wiped bare, they may not want that. You know, trees take decades to grow and become mature. And if you've got trees like that on a property, that can be a pretty desirable thing. Even if they're not mature, just having some kind of privacy and coverage like that. That's kind of how I market it, is like a private, secluded, wooded lot. it just sort of underscores the benefit of having trees like that. So I don't really find that to be a problem at all. You really just, I think one thing is like when you get pictures of the property, if you're doing it like in the middle of winter time or, early spring, depending on the area you're looking at, if those trees all look like they're dead, that can kind of make the property look a little ugly. But even then, it's not a deal killer. I mean, people usually understand, it's going to look a lot better in the summer type thing. But yeah, I would just take pictures of the property and market it with trees as though that's a good thing. And usually seems to work for me. So, Chad, so you use the assumed name for the buying activities and the LLC name for the selling. Have you ever run into one side seeing the activities of the other? And this is a follow-up to the earlier question. And no, actually. I mean, maybe it's happened, but I've never had like a weird, awkward confrontation with anybody who, saw one, say like if I was buying from a seller for really cheap and then sold it for much higher on the selling end. Nobody's ever done that. And that's because the whole idea behind coming up with two different brand names for the same business is so that you can separate it. So like when you create two separate websites and phone numbers and things like that, like the idea is to make them look like two completely separate businesses. Like one website does not link to or reference the other in any way. That's why there's two separate phone numbers. And if somebody, gets into my funnel, so to speak, on either company, they're not going to like find the other one. At least that's, if they do, it's not because I showed them the way. So yeah, that's, I've not really run into that. And that's why, is because that's how it's designed. Let's see here. Question here from Chris. Do you have a blind offer template on the REtipster Club website? Yes, I do. It is in module 2, lesson 8. It's kind of hard to see. I think it's the 4th video. There's a video where I talk about my blind offering template, and you can see a download link right beneath that video. It's like a bolded text. You just click that and you can download a zip file with my template in there. I'm looking to send out my first round of blind offers in time for the recipients to receive them before Christmas. I'm thinking of sending 1,000 to 1,200, depending on which counties I settle on. Do you pretty well stick to 10 to 15% of your estimated market value for offers? Yeah, I do. It's actually just sent out a blind offer campaign myself a couple of weeks ago, and it was in a new market I've never worked in before. And, yeah, I guess I've never worked in this one before, but it was figuring out prices for blind offers. It's simple until it isn't. I basically spent like a couple of days really trying to nail down what I thought market values per acre were for the types of properties I was going after. And the offers that I ended up sending out were like about 10% of that. And then I brought it even lower. And honestly, I think my offers were probably too low. I probably botched it by just not offering enough. I've not gotten any acceptances from that yet. This probably went out about 2.5 weeks ago. So it's probably too early to tell, honestly, but if I could do it over again, just after thinking it through more and more, I'd probably stick to like 10% in no less than that. And I've actually made the same mistake before where I've erred a little too far on the cheap side. And every time I do that, what ends up happening is I get no acceptances because my offers are just too cheap. And so I don't know. Again, I think it's too early to say for sure, but my gut is telling me I should have offered a little bit more in this particular market. And I mean, if I have to make a mistake in one direction or the other, though, I would definitely rather offer too little than too much, because getting deals where you offered too much or it kind of eats into the profit margin, it's not the end of the world, but like it makes it a lot harder to make the kind of money that you want to make on a deal, because that margin just isn't there. So, and if you did make a mistake on your thoughts of the market value, then like it hurts you even more. So, I mean, I'm not talking like to the point of like losing money, but to the point of like, in the end, you end up doing a lot of running around and wasting a lot of time for not enough payout. This is kind of the struggle I think you go through every time you start doing this in a new market, because you don't really know what's going to get results. But once you do kind of zero in on that sweet spot, that right offer price that's cheap enough for you and people actually respond to, remember that and take good notes of that, so that when you come around and hit that market again, you know exactly what to do and what got results last time. But to answer your question, yes, that 10 to 15% of market value, that's what I generally stick to. I don't go any higher than that. And when I do go lower than that, typically my response rate is not what I wanted it to be. So I would say that's a pretty safe offer range to stick to. Okay. I think this question is from Steve. When posting your terms in your ads, do you include the entire monthly amount with all applicable fees included, or just the P&I amount? Yeah, good question, Steve. I've actually sort of changed this up a little bit over the years. What I used to do was state the total monthly payment. So including any escrows or anything, my goal is just to show these people like, here's the payment. And the idea behind that being, you know, you can figure out for yourself whether or not you can afford this and whether or not you want to do that. Because usually seller financing buyers don't even really, I don't want to say not at all, but they don't care nearly as much about the total price. They're just concerned about the payment and what it's actually going to cost them. And if you tell them just the P&I amount, I mean, there's probably nothing like technically wrong with that, but you're not fooling anybody. Like, they're going to figure out before they close what their actual payment's going to be. And if that ends up being way more than what you said, or way more than what they can actually afford, you know, you might be able to like trick some people into it, but that's not really how I operate. I just tell people the truth. Like, this is what it's actually going to cost you. And they can decide for themselves what it's going to be. So yeah, I when I do that, I state the entire amount. However, though, something I should mention, in the past, like year and a half or so, in the rare cases where I do mention seller financing, I've stopped mentioning specifics in terms of numbers. Instead, I just say, seller financing is available on this deal. Feel free to call us if you're interested in that. Because I forget what the rules were, but I came across this weird little nuance when I was researching Dodd-Frank in the SAFE Act, where there was some kind of, I think I actually talk about it in the module 8 of the course. I've got some sections on some videos on Dodd-Frank and the SAFE Act. I think I actually even mentioned it in there somewhere. But basically, when you're selling with seller financing, there's something where you're like not supposed to get specific about the terms in the actual listing. And that's why I've just kind of gone to a more general mention of the fact that, hey, seller financing is available. And then if they email or call me and want them to learn more, then I'll tell them that. But the key is to just tell them like, hey, seller financing is an option. So if you need that, it's there. So that might just be something else to keep in mind if you want to talk about seller financing in your listing, is just mention the fact that it's available, but you don't have to like tell them all the specifics of what the numbers are at that point. Okay, Kyle says, had a few situations in which I've gotten responses from mailers for properties that are outside of the financial range that I can afford. Can you talk through some tips and strategies to getting these properties on contract for someone else to purchase without bearing the financial risk? Yeah, Kyle, I've actually got a big bonus module. I'm not sure if you have access. If you're an annual member or a lifetime member, you should be able to see it, but it's I think it's the second or third bonus module that's all about how to wholesale real estate, and the whole purpose of that, or the whole reason why that's helpful, is for situations like that where you're coming across deals that are like legitimately good deals, but they're way more money than you can, tackle yourself. And the idea behind this is you put the properties under contract with a assignment clause in there that allows you to assign the contract to somebody else. And, when you have that, it basically allows you to find another buyer. And once they're willing to pay purchase the property cash, you can fill out an assignment agreement, assign the purchase agreement to them, and then they basically jump in your place and can buy it instead of you buying it. It's kind of there's definitely pros and cons to it. I mean, the biggest pro is obviously you don't have to put your own money into the deal. And that's huge because it allows you to essentially go after anything. The downsides are that it's kind of hard to explain to people in a way that they will accept it and understand it. And a lot of people aren't willing to do this kind of thing. They just want you to buy it cash now. So not everybody's going to be willing to do this. And also a lot of times these deals can fall apart before you actually get to the finish line. So it's entirely possible that you'll get it under contract, put all kinds of time and energy into marketing it, and then it falls apart and goes nowhere. So it's kind of thing. I actually know somebody who does this. Like, this is all she does, is only assigning contracts for land, and she doesn't buy them anymore. And it's actually worked out pretty well for her. But last time I talked to her about this, I think she says that about half of the deals she gets under contract will fall apart before they end up selling. So it's like it's one of those things you just have to be ready for that. Like, many of them will not come to fruition, but if it's worth the fact that you don't have to put your money into it, I mean, that's a pretty substantial benefit. So anyway, if you check out that wholesaling bonus module, it explains the whole process. You can get the contracts that I use when I do that. And another thing to be aware of is that in some states, like I believe Ohio and Florida are two of them, and I think there's a number of others out there now too. In some states, by law, you cannot do this unless you are a real estate agent. Because basically somehow they were able to convince the state legislators that, hey, when people are signing contracts, they're basically being agents, which they're not really, because you are putting your name on a purchase agreement, which gives you a marketable interest in the property. But anyway, some states are not okay with that. And if you try to do this, you're basically like posing as an agent when you're not one. And I don't know what the penalties are. I'm sure there's probably some kind of fine involved or something. But make sure you understand the laws of your state before you start trying to do this, because it may not be possible to do this kind of thing. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Let's see here. David is asking, for your rental properties, do you use property management? And if so, how do you go about selecting the property management? Yes, David. I do have property managers for my rentals, and I love them. They take an incredible amount of hassle and work off my hands, and because of them, I basically spend like 2 minutes a month on my rentals, and I basically just collect the cash that comes in. And so that's like the big upside to property managers. And the downside I've found is that even a good property manager, like, their job is not to make your property look nice. It's basically just to make it functional so that like everything still works. Everything's up to code, but like in terms of like new paint, any kind of renovations, any of that stuff, they don't care about it. Like, it's not their job to do that. And if you want your tenants to have like a nice, aesthetically pleasing place to live in, if you don't actually keep track of that stuff and take care of it, it's probably going to fall apart over time from a aesthetic appearance look. It'll still work, but they don't really care about how things look. So at least mine doesn't. So, but as long as you're aware of that, like what I've kind of realized that every like couple of years, I kind of go through my rentals and just make sure things look what I deem to be acceptable. And because my property manager just doesn't really care about that like I do. But in terms of finding a good one, I've actually got a blog post that I think you might find helpful. Let me pull it up here. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, I'm going to post it right here in the chat box. Hopefully you see it. That's a blog post that talks about a number of questions you can ask to sort of screen and qualify a good property manager. So like if you just want to get an idea for like their qualifications and how good they are at their job and that kind of thing, those are some great questions to ask to sort of get you better acquainted with that. Okay, where was I? Okay, I think this is Marcus. So what would be the best strategy for buying lots sight unseen for newbie land investors? I know there are many pitfalls with lots, including wetlands, potentially polluted lots, etc. What are some ways to cut down on risks with purchasing lots without visiting the lot? Yeah, good question. Let's see if I can find it here. I think it is Module 5, Lesson 4 talks about 15 of the things that I would recommend you look at before you purchase any lot. And some of this stuff will vary depending on the area of the country that you're working in. For example, in places like Michigan, Florida, Louisiana, a lot of places on the East Coast, water in general can be a big problem. Things like flood zones, perk tests, wetlands, things that can really get in the way and make a property unusable because of the water situation. So if you're looking at land in those areas, there's a number of tools you can use to find out what the situation is and if it's going to be a problem. And that's all detailed in that particular lesson I just mentioned, Module 5, Lesson 4. However, if you're working in like the Southwest, water is not an issue because it's like a desert, so like other things you might want to pay attention to there would be like the topography of properties, how steep they are, road access, utility access, water access. Like, is there water at all? Like, can you even get water by municipal pipes or drilling a well? But anyway, once you kind of understand what the problem areas are based on the part of the country that you're working in, you can kind of, you don't have to necessarily look at all 15 of those things, but you can kind of understand, okay, what are the red flags in this area that I need to be sure I'm looking at? And those can just kind of help you understand what you should watch out for. So I'd say definitely check out that lesson, and that'll sort of be kind of enlightening for you, I think. Okay, Samir. What's up, Samir? What are the various ways to finance the procurement of land? Bank loans, notes, can you crowdsource investments? Land, I mean, when you're buying just vacant land and you're not going to develop it in any way, banks typically want nothing to do with that. Like they're not going to finance that. They will finance it if you're going to build on it immediately after you buy it, or farm on it, or do anything that's going to generate an income or increase the value substantially. But just buying land for land's sake, for what we do, banks won't get involved with that. And the same thing is kind of similar for like hard money lenders. I don't know of any crowdfunding companies out there that will touch that kind of thing either. And that's why for this particular kind of land investing strategy that we're doing here, buying properties really, really cheap and flipping them for more, I mean, that it really, really helps if you have your own cash to buy them. And because a lot of properties can be purchased for like hundreds or even just a few $1,000s, it really is feasible to do that without getting any financing. And then you own the thing free and clear. And it's technically worth a lot more than you paid for it. So like you're getting a lot of free equity when you buy the thing. And that whole, the financing thing is actually really helpful on the selling end as well, because, you know, like we just talked about, because most lenders won't touch land and because you own it free and clear, it makes it very compelling to offer seller financing on that when you sell it. I mean, it really can work to your benefit if you're willing to learn the whole seller financing side of things. Yeah, that's just something I would keep in mind, is that the financing issue, like it's kind of a problem if you're buying stuff at full market value, but since we're not doing that, it's actually really helpful for us. The system kind of works in our favor. So hopefully that makes sense, Samir. Okay, Jordan. Negotiation question here. When talking to sellers, do you ever find yourself having to explain why you need such a big discount? How do you explain to them as gracefully as possible that you can't pay close to full value because you intend not to use the land, but to resell it for a profit? I asked because a seller I spoke to last week countered my $500 offer with $3,000, saying that that's still substantially under its value. And she might be right, but still not even close to the kind of discount we need according to this business model. Yeah, so one of the things that I really like about the land investing business is that if you want to negotiate with people like this, like if you want to have all these conversations and go back and forth and try to justify one price over another price, like you can do that. And sometimes it can work, but a lot of times if you're having to negotiate at all, the deal is probably not going to happen because you're talking to somebody who cares about the value of their property and getting more, getting more than 10 or 15 or 20% of the value. And as soon as you start going there, at least when I'm looking at deals like that, as soon as I start going there, it's like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. See ya. There's no point in me trying to say, if I don't know what the numbers are here, but if $500, if that's 10% of the market value, I mean, that's pretty much as high as I'm going to go. Maybe 1,000 if it's like a really good deal, but beyond that, there's no point in even talking about it because I'm not going to do it. And if they are insistent on $3,000, I mean, in terms of explaining it, you can just say, this is our business model. We buy it, we don't buy it full retail. We buy at garage sale prices, and that's how we work. And it's nothing against you. It has nothing to do with your property. This is the kind of offer we send out to everybody, and it's not the right fit for everybody. And if you don't want to do this is totally fine. I wish you all the best with trying to find a buyer somewhere else. And a lot of times when we end up parting ways, they end up coming back 6 months to a year later and say, hey, can we talk about that whole $500 offer you put on the table in the beginning? And if you want to at that point, you can say, okay, well, the offer is now $300. So if you still want to do it, that's the price. Or you could do 500 still if you wanted to. It's up to you. But, that's just kind of the way it is. And if somebody is not willing to play ball at our offer prices, like that's totally their prerogative. They can do whatever they want, but that just is telling us, okay, this is not actually a motivated seller. This is not the right profile of the person that we're trying to work with. It's nothing against them. It's not going to work. So That's kind of how I handle those conversations. And sort of the nicer thing about, when you're doing offers through email or blind offers or things like that, is that like if you're basically not having a phone conversation with them up front, that makes it even easier because you can just throw a bunch of crap at the wall and see what sticks. I mean, essentially is what it boils down to. And I mean, that is correct. Many, many people will say no and will not be interested. Like that's what most people will say, but we're not looking for most people. We're looking for that small segment that fits into the box that we're looking for. And if this person doesn't, okay, see you later. That's kind of how I handle those things. Okay, Steve is asking, what made you choose this new market? Curiosity. I've never done blind offers in this particular market that I've worked in before. And blind offers have been working for me in other places. And this new market I'm working in is substantially higher value property. And I just wanted to kind of give it a shot and see if it worked there as well. So, and the jury is still out. I don't know if it will or not, but yeah, just kind of wanted to give it a shot and see how it went. So let's see, Chris, what other fees would be in addition to the P&I on a seller financing deal? Do the online credit card ACH companies charge additional fees? Yeah, good question. Well, when you say fees, I mean, that can be classified by a few different things. Something I always tack on to every monthly payment is another $15 servicing fee. And this was in the banking world, when I used to work in banking, this was a very common thing where it's like, for the work that it takes me to take your monthly payment and handle the books and record keeping and all that, I'm charging you $15 for that. And that's actually really cheap. Like you could do 25 if you wanted to, and that's still considered pretty normal. Or you could do more if it was a bigger deal. So anyway, I always do $15 in addition to the P&I. If I am handling the payment of the property taxes, then I will take the annual tax bill divided by 12 and collect that as well. If there are any HOA fees, which usually there's not because I don't deal with those in most cases, but if I am, then it's the same thing. Take the annual HOA amount divided by 12 and collect that. Really, any additional costs involved with me holding the property, you just sort of annualize that and collect that on a monthly basis from them. And in terms of like ACH or credit card fees, I think the Geek Pay service, when I was talking to Mark Podolsky about that, I think he charges like 3% or something. Like he tax an additional 3% on top of everything else to cover that as well. It's really whatever you want to do, honestly. You got to sort of stay within reason. You can't go crazy, but if there's any cost that you have to cover, whether it's for processing the payment or doing the accounting work or covering holding costs, any of that stuff is fair game. You just have to make sure that that gets factored into the monthly payment. So that's what I would say, Chris. Okay. Brandon is asking, how many residential vacant land parcels do you mail out from each county list? Well, like an average number I would say is probably like 750 for one direct mail campaign. And I think it depends on whether you're doing like blind offers to a list you got from a list service versus a delinquent tax list, because those are sort of two different types of property owners. And delinquent tax property owners, because they have delinquent taxes, I think you'll usually find there is a higher percentage of them are motivated to sell. Like they have an actual reason and you know what the reason is why they're trying to sell, because they've got delinquent taxes. Whereas a more general list of landowners, they may or may not. You don't really know that. They don't have like a identified red flag that they're dealing with. So If you're doing a delinquent tax list, I would think 750 mailers is enough to keep you pretty darn busy for a little while, probably like a week or 2 weeks, in terms of, if you're responding to phone calls or website submissions or anything like that. That's usually been enough for me to stay pretty busy. When doing blind offers, I'd see probably have to send out like twice as many if you want to stay just as busy, like 1,500-ish. With the blind offer campaigns I've done, I've actually been doing closer to like 1,000, so not quite as many. And if I've priced everything right and done it perfectly, that'll still get me a number of deals. But if I don't price it quite right, or if I'm kind of just like exploring and trying to figure out what's going to work in this new market, then it may not necessarily produce like an overwhelming number of results. So hopefully that gives you some perspective. Okay, Jordan says, I reread your Truth About Land Investing lesson about things that could kill a land deal, and one thing you mentioned is availability of utilities such as water, which you just referred to a few minutes ago. It does seem like a lack of water would make a piece of land unbuildable and therefore worthless. But then it seems like that would make just about all desert land worthless, which doesn't make sense, as that's what so many land investors focus on. For those buying land in lake areas such as those in your state of Michigan, this obviously doesn't apply. So how does one deal with lack of water when buying land in desert terrain? Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. I've actually kind of wondered that same thing. It's always sort of surprised me that so many people default to desert land as like the number one place to go. I think the reason that happens is partially because, all the other land investing educators out there are from Scottsdale, Arizona, which is all desert, surrounded by desert. And that's kind of just where they've worked a lot. And so that's sort of what they know, and that's what they talk about. But it's also because, getting large acreage in the Southwest is also a lot easier. Like there's a lot more huge parcels of land for cheap, whereas that's a little harder to find in more of the Midwest, Northeast, Northwest parts of the country. So, but yeah, in terms of like the whole water issue, I know one thing that people can actually do is get water trucked in. So if there's no water, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not buildable. It just means that it's a hassle to get water. Like you can get a giant tank on your property, and I don't know how often, a couple times a year or something, a water truck can literally come in and refill your water. And once you're out of water, you don't have water. So it's sort of a hassle, but I think similar to like getting your septic tank emptied every several years, it's kind of a similar thing where you buy the property knowing that issue is there, and that's something you'll have to deal with if you ever want to build something on that property. And a lot of people do it. And the other thing about having no access to water is just because you're in a desert does not mean you can't drill a well and get water there. I own a number of properties in the desert part of the U.S. right now, and they all have shared well access. So it is a desert, and they do have water. So it's not necessarily like just because it's in a dry part of the country you can't get water, but it is something that like you sort of want to know what the situation is if you're going to do that. And if you want to market it as a buildable property, you should probably be aware of what is really possible there, because you don't want to be, it's one of those like notable things that you don't want to like hide from somebody when you're selling a property to them. So if you know what that situation is, you need to kind of disclose that. So hopefully that makes sense, Jordan. Okay, question here from David. Have you been able to have your land used for solar or wind energy and receive a revenue from that? I've approached Alcen Renewable Energy about using land I have in Colorado. They say the land could be used for solar and are doing research. It's kind of cool. It seems that it will take years for this to come to fruition. Any experience with that? Yeah, good question, David. I have actually not done that. I think part of what goes into that, using land for solar or wind, if you're going to do wind, it's got to be in a part of the country that has a lot of wind coming through. And there, I don't know why, but there are certain, like there's a city in Michigan called Ludington. It's a really small town, but for whatever reason, it's a very, very windy part of the state. Like it is always windy. And like that is a perfect place for wind turbines. And they have dozens of them there. There's another place near West Lafayette, Indiana, that's similar. And when you drive there, you'll see just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these wind turbines all over the place, because there's always wind coming through there. So if your property is not in one of those high wind areas, you're probably going to have a harder time getting them to put a wind turbine there. And usually one good indication is to just look around and say, hey, are there other wind turbines here? Because if not, they're probably not going to come and put one up just for you and nobody else. So that's one way to kind of just check it. And I think there's websites as well that kind of tell you what the common wind, what's the word? You know, how much wind and how fast that wind is going year round. They actually talk about it in that guest post on my blog from Alcen Renewable. So it might be worth checking out. And in terms of like solar energy, you know, I think it's a similar thing where it has a lot to do with what part of the country you're in. Like Arizona would be a perfect place for that. Colorado, I mean, Colorado is sort of a desert. I don't know how much cloud cover there is on a typical year in, you know, where your property is located, but that would probably be another notable thing. Like Michigan would be a terrible place to put solar because like half the year, like as I speak, it's just totally overcast skies here, and there's not, and the sun rises and sets, you know, there's just not a lot of sunlight here. So kind of have to just understand the natural characteristics of wherever your property is at. And I've not really investigated much of that myself at all. I've looked at other things like, you know, outdoor advertising and billboards and that kind of thing. That's kind of a totally different ball game. But yeah, it's my experience with it is that when you're buying land the way that we are, it's almost kind of like a luck thing. Like when you come across those types of properties, like you sort of have to know what you're looking for. Like, you know, I had a property that was a really small parcel right on the side of a highway, and like it would have been perfect for that, except the township had it zoned as residential, which means they couldn't, because it has to be zoned commercial in order to do that. So once you sort of know what these companies, energy companies or advertising companies, once you know what they're looking for in the ideal property, you can sort of just keep that in mind as you're looking at the deals that you come across. And, you know, if you see one that seems to fit that profile, then yeah, it's totally worth reaching out to them, because you never know. I mean, some of these deals can pay really, really well for a long time. So if you can find one, it's kind of a luck thing, but I'm sure they're out there. And if you have any, if you're wondering about the possibilities, there's no reason not to reach out to these companies and ask, because the worst they can say is no. Okay, Samir, what has been your experience with landlocked land? It's actually been really good. I've bought a number of landlocked properties, and they've always sold really well. And the reason is because when a property is landlocked, and I know that, and the seller knows that, I'm able to negotiate a very, very, very low price, like not 10% of market value, but like 2% of market value, like basically nothing, because everybody knows this property is technically useless because you can't get to it. And when you can kind of sell it that way on the acquisition side, and then when it comes time to sell the property to a new buyer, I mean, you definitely want to disclose the fact that it is landlocked. You don't want to hide that from them, but a lot of people are happy to buy this kind of property, not because it makes logical sense, but because they love the idea of owning land. I mean, if you can own 5 acres somewhere, even if it's really hard to get to, for whatever reason, a lot of people don't care. And usually what I've had to do when I'm selling landlocked property is just price it really cheap. And I can do that because I got it for such a cheap price in the first place, like even cheaper than cheap. So landlocked properties can totally work. You just have to make sure that when you're buying it, you're paying like almost nothing for it. And then you can sort of make sure you're coming out okay. Okay, Brandon, when you have an initial call with a seller when gathering their property info, do you give the offer immediately on the phone or do you email them an offer later? It's been a while since I've handled my deals that way. Usually these days, my leads are coming to me either through my website or through the acceptance of a blind offer. And that's kind of the way I've set up my voicemail system, is it sort of drives them to my website if they do happen to call me. But back in the days when I was doing that, in terms of having these phone calls before making offers, usually I would not verbally give them that offer over the phone. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times in that phone call, the reason for the phone call was to get a lot of information that I didn't already have. And I sort of needed to take that into consideration before I came up with my offer price. So that's kind of why I've done it that way. And yeah, however you want to do, or however way you want to do it, I don't think it really matters. I think doing it over the phone makes it faster for sure. But I don't know if there's a difference in acceptance rate between verbally saying it and like emailing or mailing the offer to them later. I'm not sure if that makes a difference, honestly. I've not done a lot of split testing with that, but I typically did not do it over the phone. Usually it was through some kind of mail or email after that conversation. So, okay, Steve, do you adjust the terms payments annually if the taxes change year over year? I have not with mine. I think you could. And if you were talking to like a servicing, like a loan servicing company, they might do that kind of thing. Just because they've got the systems in place to do that easily, but I've not. Usually I just kind of, I guess if the amount came up short, I might have to collect some like one-time payment outside of the usual payment to make up for that. But if the tax amount went down, I would probably just keep collecting the money and just keep track of that escrow balance. And if I had, an additional amount after the fact, I'd pay it back to them. So let's see here. Brandon, when narrowing down the list from the counties, I usually get down to about 50 parcels that are actual residential vacant land that are a decent size without an old building or barn on it. Am I in the wrong market? Number 2, there are many farm lots. Do you ever buy agricultural farmland? Brandon, when you say you get down to 50 parcels, what did you start with? Did you start with like 500 or 100 or 5,000 or 50,000? Like how, I don't know what that means in terms of how much further down you're going. I can say, it also sort of depends on how you are, it also kind of depends on how you are screening out parcel, like how you're filtering out and saying which ones you don't want. It could be that you're just being like really, really, really specific about what you want, and maybe it's worth opening up the box a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. It may be worth checking out a couple other counties and just getting other lists and going through the same process and seeing if you come to a similar place. I know when I was getting started, I sort of shot for like probably 6 different counties in my first few months, just to like figure out, okay, what do all these counties have to offer? How do the lists differ? And that kind of helped me decide pretty early on too, which counties I did and didn't want to continue working in. So it may be worth checking out some other counties just to see what else is out there. And buying agricultural farmland, I don't know what kind of acreage you're talking about, if that's like 5 acres or 40 or 500. Usually what I'm looking at is just value, like what properties are sort of in the price range that, I could make an offer that I'm willing to put this kind of money down on. Yeah, I've made offers on farmland before. That's not usually what I end up getting in my lists, just because the places I've worked are not like big agricultural areas. And usually if farmland is in use, it's actually producing an income for the person that owns it. And I guess I don't, there's always exceptions, but I think that people who are actively making an income from their land, it's a little bit different than the normal residential lot that we go after. And they may be less willing to sell for pennies on the dollar, just because like by selling it, they're losing a source of income. So you better give them a good offer. So I think there's nothing wrong with making offers on those, but you may have a lower acceptance rate for those kinds of deals. Jordan says, I recently read that bonus about wholesaling you mentioned earlier, and one thing I still don't understand about wholesaling when it comes to land is how the pricing works. We've all heard about the 70% minus repair costs when it comes to houses that are going to be rehabbed and flipped to an end buyer at ARV, but it's harder, though not impossible, to fix land. That being the case, are you just trying to price your land low enough so that your buyer could resell at a current market value? For example, a contract for $10,000 with a $5,000 assignment fee for land valued at $20,000. I mean, when I've assigned land, I've usually been assigning it to the end user. So it's like the person who's actually going to use the land and they are okay with paying market value or close to it. So usually my biggest concern is like, I just want to get it for really cheap. And whether that means 10% or 20 or 30. And with this kind of deal, because I'm not putting my own money into it and it's no skin off my back if the thing falls apart, I mean, offering 40 or even 50% of market value for that original purchase agreement, I mean, that could work too. And that may be one reason why this kind of seller would be willing to do this kind of thing, is because they're getting more money. And I mean, ultimately my goal is to make money from the assignment fee. When I find the end buyer and assign it to them, I'm getting paid through that without having to put any of my own money into it. So, say if a property was worth $100,000 and I got it under contract for $50,000 and the end buyer buys it for, I don't know, $70,000. And then I get an assignment fee for $5,000 or $10,000. I mean, really, the numbers can be anything as long as I'm getting paid a decent amount through the assignment fee. I mean, a couple thousand, I usually wouldn't want to go any less than that. 5,000 is more ideal. 10,000 if I can. So that's sort of how I look at that. The whole, just kind of forget all the stuff about houses and that just doesn't apply here. The ARV and repair, that's just a different thing. It doesn't, that's not how we look at wholesaling land. We're just looking at the, buy price, market value, and then what we can assign it for and the assignment fee we can get. Okay. Chad is asking, do you mainly send blind offers now, or does it just depend on the county? In 2017, I've been doing pretty much all blind offers. And the reason is because it's not because the postcards and the delinquent tax list stuff doesn't work. It's because I've been trying to get more familiar with blind offers, making sure I understand that and, know what I'm doing and have good experiences with that. Just so I can sort of compare and contrast it with the postcard approach, because I think they both have their pros and cons and things about them that are good and bad. So that's why I've been doing that. And it's been going, okay. I've had a couple campaigns that just fell flat and got like no acceptances. And I think that's because I priced them too low. Both can work. I think the downside with blind offers is that you generally have to pay more upfront for your list and for the mail that you're sending out. But it also can save a lot of time, just in terms of like I don't talk to anybody until they've either accepted my offer or expressed serious interest in that, and they already know what my number is. So I'm not like wasting a bunch of time before they really know what my offer is going to be. And that's like, I think, the biggest advantage to blind offers. But you can also lose lots of opportunities, and some people just need a conversation before they're willing to sell a deal. And by sort of negating that, you're sort of, I think it's kind of a turn off to a lot of people. So it's just kind of depends. But anyway, all that to say, yeah, blind offers is what I've been doing a lot more of this year. Okay, Jordan, one more quick question about wholesaling regarding the legality. Is the issue what state you're in, the seller is in, or the land is in? I believe it all comes down to the state that the property is in. So, yeah, it's basically wherever that property is located. And because that's generally where if you get a title company involved, that's where they would close it as well. And that's where the county is going to be recording everything. So, yeah, it's where the property is located. And I see there's a few questions here in the Q&A box, which I think I've already answered. Sorry, guys, I kind of lost track of that. I was looking at the chat box over here. So, but yeah, I think that's everything. I think I got everybody's question. So thanks again, everybody, for hanging out with me for this past hour. Hopefully I answered some questions that you guys have. I'm going to do my best to get this thing uploaded and organized on the site in the next few days here. Might take me a little longer than normal because I'm using this new system and I'm still trying to figure it out. But again, thanks to everybody for hanging out, and I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Hope you all continue to do awesome things in your businesses, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you again in the next one of these things that we do in December. So thanks again for joining me, and I will talk to you guys later.